question about a failed attempt by Mr. Deladian. On July 20, you sent a letter to Chairman Upton. You said this, quote, in another instance, Biomax offered to pay much more, sending the affiliate a procurement agreement that offered a payment of $1,600. Your letter says this was a, quote, astronomical amount compared to the reasonable cost affiliates are allowed to recoup under federal law. Is that right?
I don't have that in front of me, but it sounds, to the best of my knowledge, it's correct.
All right. I see that I'm out of time, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank
the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Richards, for being here today. I appreciate your testimony. I am also married to a strong lady. She is a family nurse practitioner. Helped launch the sexual assault nurse examiner program at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center many years ago. But we stand together. We have done work in our inner cities and places like Cleveland and Baltimore and New York. And I'm troubled with some of the statistics that we've even seen out of New York. And maybe you can address that. I want to talk over you. I want to give you a chance to respond. But according to New York Health Department statistics, we now know that there are more African-American babies that are aborted in New York than actually born alive. Are you aware of that statistic?
I'm not aware of that statistic.
Okay. If that is correct, would that concern you? Because obviously Planned Parenthood has more clinics in New York State than any other state.
Actually, that's not true. We do not.
What is the #1 leading state that you have?
I believe it's California. I'll have to look though to make sure.
But if you know that's not true.
And it's not only, I mean, Planned Parenthood, there are a number of healthcare providers in the state of New York beyond Planned Parenthood. It's one of the better served.
I understand, but we've already established that somewhere between 30 and 40% of all abortions come from your organization. So if we're going to put out the stats, we want to make sure that we're talking correct on the numbers.
And I do think, Mr. Walker, it's a really important point because I think one of the other, I'm not what all the statistics are that you have, but of course the lack of access for African American women in particular to basic preventive health care, including family planning, is a huge problem in this country.
It is,
well.
and I don't want to spend, and I agree with you, that's as a aforementioned time of places that we've served and worked in, but it does concern me that 3 times the African American population is 13%, yet they're being aborted 3 times % of the population at 35%. That should concern all of us. I'm sure it concerns you as well. I do have a specific question regarding the $32 million that's sent overseas. Does Planned Parenthood send any funds to the Democratic Republic of Congo?
You know, this was asked earlier, and
we did touch on it, but I want to come back to it.
I have to get back. Honestly, I didn't bring materials about our international global program. I would have to get back to you that. I'm not trying to evade it. It's just not something that I thought was a topic of the committee meeting.
Well, I hope you would, because we have laws in this country that permit or prohibit us from sending money to places where we have sanctions on, and if Planned Parenthood is doing that, I would imagine that would be something that would concern you, would it not?
We certainly comply with all the laws, both globally and domestically, and that's why I commit to you. I will get information. We'll work with the committee to get information about the Congo.
Fair enough. I have a question. As a former pastor, 15 years in a couple large churches, there are many times where we counseled women at different ages, various ages, for different things that we're going through. Sometimes 15, 20, 25 years later, after going through an abortion, there was still some struggle there. I don't disparage these women for making tough choices. As you've talked about, many have come from underprivileged communities, didn't even feel like they had options. But of the $500 million of the taxpayers' money that goes to your organization, how much of that is set aside to offer counseling to some of those women who are still struggling with that issue?
Well, this is what it's really hard to explain to you, because I feel like we're talking past each other. We don't get a big check from the federal government. We're reimbursed for direct services, but they're all family planning, STD testing, well-women visit. I will say though, one area I think you and I might agree, I would love in this country if we would fully fund, for Planned Parenthood or anywhere else, comprehensive counseling services for women on a whole host of issues. It is very underfunded, and it is really important to us as well, because we do counseling with women every single day.
I understand that, and I agree that there are some legitimate services offered, but this is something that I saw for 15 years. So of the $1.3 billion in revenue, even if it doesn't come from taxpayers, how much of that is set aside to offer these services of women who are seeking counseling?
We counsel, I don't know how, I could get the numbers for you. We counsel women and young people and men every single day. at Planned Parenthood health centers all across the country, and most of it, as you probably know, is uncompensated care.
Well, I look at your numbers, and I would tell you this, it is amazing as far as the amount of revenue that exists, and that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about how much you're sending overseas. But I do have one final question. If, this is a big if there is proven to be criminal activity through an investigation, would you have any problem redirecting the $500 million or the $60 million of the 20% that's not Medicaid? Would you have any problem redirecting that to other women's health care organizations who are offering genuine health care?
Well, I'm not going to answer to a hypothetical, and again, we follow all the laws at Planned Parenthood. The health and safety of our patients is our #1 concern. If there is any issue ever, the state or local, national level, we will address it, and we do so swiftly, and we always have.
Thank you, Ms. Richards. I yield back.
Thank you. Now I'll recognize the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Mr. Cummings. Thank you, Ms. Richards, for being here for the inordinate amount of time that you have. And I reiterate so much of what my colleagues here on this side of the aisle have said regarding this hearing and some of the concerns. You and your office know that I vocalized to you privately the fact that I'm displeased that Planned Parenthood is not present in my own district in the Virgin Islands or in any of the territories which have approximately 4 million people. And the reason I'm displeased about that is because I know the good work that Planned Parenthood does in preventative health for its women, with the Virgin Islands having 141 unplanned teen pregnancies per 1,000 when the national rate is 29 pregnancies per 1,000. I see how important the work that you guys do is to different areas. And, you know, the chairman has 7 clinics in his area in Utah. And, Mr. Chairman, we'd be glad to take any one of them in the Virgin Islands to be able to support women's health and the work that you do, knowing that 78% of those 7 clinics are in rural areas. And I know that this committee is searching for truth, and that's the purpose of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. And I believe that we need to do that in a neutral and even-handed manner that reflects the integrity of this committee, which is why I think that this is a premature committee hearing, if not the fact that the other side, the individual that the minority has requested to be here, Mr. Daliaden, is not here. And while I understand that Mr. Daliaden has had restrictions on the videos being produced, he has not produced one document that has been requested by this committee from either side. Ms. Richards, do you know how many documents, how many pages of documents Planned Parenthood has produced for this committee?
Will the gentlewoman yield?
No, not at this time, sir. Afterwards, I will leave you some time.
Well, I know thousands and thousands of pages of documents.
I think it's 20,000 pages. And I know that the ranking member Cummings has sent a request for documents, and the chairman, Chaffetz, and Representative Jordan have sent their own request for documents. And a subpoena was issued, and it has not. Not one page of documents. Although I understand that from the testimony that the videos were, in fact, there was a question regarding that. And so, Ms. Richards, I want to ask you some questions since we only have Planned Parenthood here, and we only have your documents that we're able to put up and put up on screens and for you to be questioned about, not the other side, which as an attorney is a little problematic for me to be able to get to the truth if I don't see both sides of the evidence being presented to me. I understand that there are several states that have launched investigations against Planned Parenthood. Is that correct?
Well, there have been a variety of, I mean, we're constantly being overseeing our healthcare services. And yes, I think as a result of this recent campaign, there have been various state
And I understand
inquiries.
that several of those states have cleared Planned Parenthood of any wrongdoing.
That's correct. That's correct.
And that there has not been produced any credible evidence that your organization has broken a single law. Is that correct?
I believe that's true.
And however, there's plenty of evidence that Mr. Daliaden and his associates have violated both federal and state laws. One example is his group obtaining tax-exempt status and apparently solicited charitable contributions under false pretense. Ms. Richards, are you aware that the Center for Medical Progress obtained a 501c3 status, as I quote, a biomedicine or bioengineering organization,
Well, all I know is what I've read in the paper about the organization.
and that, in fact, is a fake organization that filed official paperwork with the state of California to create a sham tissue procurement company called Biomax Procurement Services, LLC. Ms. Richards, as far as I know, illegally filing false paperwork with a state agency it's illegal and against the law, right?
It may be, I don't know, and I know there's a lawsuit now pending, and I think the Attorney General of California has indicated that there will be an investigation.
And so for me, for us to have this discussion with you without having the balance of the other side becomes problematic. Mr. Chairman, did you want to say something at this point?
Yes, I thank the gentlewoman for yielding that she made a suggestion that Mr. Deladian had not been responsive to our inquiries. That's not true. We issued a subpoena, responded within the time. That package that arrived has not been opened. It's in our safe. He's unable to provide all of the documents given that there is a temporary restraining order. We understand that. House counsel's involved. Mr. Cummings and I evidently agree on this point that we're trying to get all of that information. But to suggest that he was non-responsive is simply not true because he did respond within the time allocated under the subpoena.
Well, it's my position, Mr. Chairman, that until you're able to open all of those documents and receive all of them, and we're able to balance them against the documents, the 20,000 pages of documents produced by Planned Parenthood, that this is an unfair hearing and that we're not getting a balance and able to do that.
I agree that we need all the information. That's why Mr. Deladian was not invited to this hearing. The subject is exactly what I said in my opening comments and statements, of which many members have inquired about. It's the funding component. We did not title this hearing as a hearing on the videos. It caused some controversy, but we have, in the essence of time, some legitimate discussion about a continuing resolution and ongoing funding for Planned Parenthood, and we've laid that out. But my comments were not about the video, it was about the funding. That's where my concern lies.
Mr.
And
Chairman.
we will get to hopefully see all of those videos, but we've got to get past the restraining order that has been put in place by a judge in California.
Mr. Chairman, if we're going to discuss funding and knowing that members of Congress can sit here and ask questions that run the gamut, and that funding question is related to those videos, which are the genesis of the question of whether to defund, then I think it's a little naive of us to think that that discussion can be done in a vacuum without the videos and the other documents from the other side.
The
I
gentleman
think that
will
my
yield.
time is up.
Would the gentleman yield with the
Sure, go ahead.
chairman's indulgence? In fairness to the gentlelady, I'm looking at the memorandum from the majority, and it talks about background for this hearing. And the first sentence on the background says, recently released videos demonstrate Planned Parenthood Federation of America participates in transactions involving transferring fetal tissue for remuneration. And then it goes on. But let me just very briefly, so that the record is clear. The gentlelady referred to documents that we had not received. And again, I'd like to briefly clarify one point on the record because it is important for the committee members to understand, and I'll be very brief. On Friday afternoon, the Republican staff informed Democratic staff that Mr. Deliden sent them a package, a FedEx box, but they said that they did not want to open it until this week. We thought this was strange because if the Republicans delayed opening this package, members would not have had enough time to review whatever was inside before today's hearing. So our staff also made it clear that if the Republicans wanted to use any of this material at today's hearing, it should be open immediately on Friday, so we would could begin to reviewing it as soon as possible through the weekend. But the Republican staff told us that they wanted to just keep the box closed. They said they would not open it and they would not use it at the hearing. So, as of this moment, we still do not know for sure what is inside that box from Mr. Deliden. However, we did receive a copy of minutes from a recent hearing in a lawsuit in California where Mr. Deliden's attorneys apparently told the court in that case that they delivered additional video footage to our committee, so even more footage that Mr. Daleiden cut from the videos he's released publicly. So we want to open the package. We want members to have equal access to the videos that are apparently inside, and we definitely want to see what the other footage Mr. Daleiden was concealing from the public. And I'll yield back.
Yeah, I want to see all the videos too. That's why we issued a subpoena. I wish you all had supported us when we issued it.
Again, Mr. Chairman, I've said it before, and I don't want to.
I'm glad to have your support now.
I don't want to belabor
glad
it.
to have
No,
your
it's
support
not now. We've supported, and I can show you the documents to show you that we consistently have asked that we get all of the tapes. And I will certainly, if you give me a few minutes while others are asking questions, I'll give you the very documents that we sent you showing that. Okay.
All right, we're going to go now to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and I'll try and make my Democrat colleagues happy and ask funding questions that have nothing to do with the videos. How about that? Which is more important to you, Ms. Richards, actually providing women's health care services or lobbying?
Well, I think these two things go hand in hand, and certainly what we have learned over the years is that in order to be able to provide health care services to women, you have to also be able to advocate, particularly for women who are underserved. So I think the two things actually go hand in hand.
Fair enough. You spent $21 million on lobbying in the last couple of years. You spent $0 on mammograms. Why is that?
Well, I think we've discussed mammograms repeatedly and how women's health care works. So when I go to my doctor, I get a breast
do a
exam.
referral, I get that. Why
and
don't you do 'em?
We refer to
Why don't you do them?
Well, we're not a radiological clinic, and I actually don't think that's
Why not? That's a woman's service.
Well, I guess we could take it up, but we never have provided mammograms because we work in concert with folks who do provide radiological services.
You're
We
aware,
do
by
a
the
number
way,
of breast exams.
You're aware, by the way, there's people running for president saying that you do provide mammograms, and that's not accurate, is it?
Well, there are a number of people running for president saying a lot of things that
On that
I
side.
can't certainly.
You said earlier that you don't make any money from federal funds, right? You don't make any profit off the federal funds. Is that correct?
So Planned Parenthood is a national office. We have one source of federal funding right now. It's a $21,000 roughly grant for a birth control clinical trial where we're actually reimbursed for costs alone, and that's the only source of federal resources that come to the national office. So we couldn't make a profit off that.
Where's the $532 million going?
So Medicaid and Title X.
So when you said you don't make any money off the federal funds, you were talking about the parent, not about your operations.
I was trying to explain that the national office, and then we have 59 affiliates, we have 650 to 700 health centers that provide healthcare services.
Is it your testimony that none of those make any profit off of federal funds?
Well, I would have to, they're all reimbursed for services that they provide, and my
provides them a
experience has been,
profit, right?
Excuse me?
That provides a profit. You get reimbursed for services.
Well, we're a nonprofit, so that's.
You're a nonprofit that made $127 million last year.
We didn't make money. We don't make money. We actually reinvest money in healthcare services and education and
Okay, so good.
a lot of other things.
Let's talk about that.
I wanted to answer
I
your
want to
first
follow up on that question. Now let's go on to this one. You just mentioned that you don't make money, but you had revenues in excess of your expenses of $127 million last year. That's right. That's your testimony.
We
It's your
raised-
numbers. Right. So here's my question. I'm going to get to the question if you let me. Where does the money go? Where does that $127 million go?
So like any organization of our size and scale, a lot of our resources are in what is a board-designated endowment or reserve. We are a 99-year-old organization, and so we've built our endowment. But also, I'm investing
So you
in-
retain those
I'm in-
earnings. In the private sense, you would retain those, or you put them in the bank.
Well, I hope they're in the bank and not just laying around, but I certainly, in addition to that, so some are in reserves, and the other is I've just invested in expanding healthcare services and building new clinics in a variety of states across the country.
How is
That's
that not an
paid for.
expense?
Excuse me?
How is that not an expense?
Well, it is an expense.
No, but your books reflect revenues in excess of expenses of
Well,
$127 million.
I'm sorry, they're not all out the door, but I've made commitments to opening up new health centers in New Orleans, in Dallas, in other states in the South, or opening in other states that I won't mention here probably because it would just cause more attention.
Services. Okay, so let's say that money goes towards expanding their service. One of the proposals here, Ms. Richards, is to defund Planned Parenthood, which includes taking $60 million, roughly $60 million away from what you get out of discretionary funding. If we took $60 million away from you could still perform every single service that you gave last year, can't you?
I can't say that because those.
Well, you made 120. You said you have revenues in excess of expenses of 127 million. Now you told me what you do with 127 million. You're spending it. You're investing it. You're expanding. I get that. But if you had $60 million less last year, you could have provided every single service to every single woman that you did last year.
Well, I constantly raise money to expand services to the patients that look to us, and so
And God bless
I don't.
you. And I think that's great. But answer my question, please. You could have provided every single service that you did to every single woman last year if you did not get a penny from the discretionary fund from the United States Congress.
I actually disagree, and there's no way I could agree to that. These are services that are spread out all across the country, and I can't possibly account for how each dollar that I raise, some of which is committed to other services and expansion of services, could simply replace federal dollars.
Not expansions of service. I'm talking about services you actually provided. You would have had $67 million.
Well, we're expanding services beyond what we already provide.
Got that. Not my question. My question is, if we had not funded you last year, you still would have been able to provide the services. And I think the answer is unequivocally yes. You might not have been able to expand your services, but every single woman that walked into every single clinic would have been served if you had not received that money from Congress. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I disagree, but
And we're just trying to figure out why you would disagree with that. Revenues would still exceed expenses, even with $60 million less.
so do you want me to start talking? Are we now having this conversation? I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if we're finishing this.
Sure.
So I raise money every single day to expand services and education services to people in America. That's what we do at Planned Parenthood. And like any other nonprofit, we reserve money for all kinds of services that need to be expanded, assistance that needs to be provided, and that's what we do with our money. We're a nonprofit. We don't do anything else with our money other than put it back into the services, the education, and sometimes the advocacy that we provide.
We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Lujan Grisham, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Richards. And if this committee is going to undertake how Medicaid money is used and not used by every health care provider in every state and every local government in the United States, it might be a very interesting hearing about how we can assure that the Medicaid funds that are not reaching so many still, even with the progress of the Affordable Care Act, so many women and so many families, that would be a hearing that I think would be well worth having. I'm going to go back to both the funding aspects here, the unintended consequences, and really I appreciate the comments of all of my colleagues, but Mr. Welch and Mr. Boyle. I served as the New Mexico Secretary of Health, and one of my challenges was certainly to deal with teen pregnancy, but to also to make sure that we had the right partnerships and viable access in a public health system where women and their families could get access to health care services that were of high quality and services that they trust. I can tell you something you already know, that without Planned Parenthood, we could not meet those access points, and quite frankly, even in the public health system, there are many women, particularly in rural and frontier areas of the state, who A, did not have access or would absolutely under no circumstances choose that access, where I'd like to tell you that our record about prevention and preventing pregnancy was better in the public health system. And that was in a world where we didn't have the 2008 budget issues, where our state now is not putting money into public health or expanding public health or working on women's health care. And without the Affordable Care Act, our rural hospitals and community health centers would all but be closed. And I will tell you that we now have the highest teen pregnancy rate in the country, with efforts at looking at what we can do for 15-year-olds to prevent the second and third pregnancy. Women need and deserve unfettered, high-quality, confidential access to comprehensive health services. And I'm hearing from hundreds of constituents, and I also know that thousands of New Mexico women and their families will not have access to these services because it is all connected, and even if it wasn't, would still want them to have the choices that they make that are right for them. But with all of the funding issues that we debate in this Congress, I know unequivocally that they don't have access in many of the places that they should, and under the Equal Protection Clause, they certainly ought to with Medicaid funding. Can you talk a little bit more about what states like New Mexico with these high teen pregnancy rates, without public health access, without those rural access points, where would those 21,000 women go?
Well, I thank you for your service in the public health arena and for your question. I do think it's incredibly important that we're constantly looking at new ways to help particularly young people access information and services. And it sort of goes back to the chairman's question maybe earlier, which is one of the things we do at Planned Parenthood, in addition to providing Medicaid family planning services and other, is we now run education programs all across the country and through the web that have an average of 6 million visitors every single month, and visited by young people and by their families, English and in Spanish, because many people don't have access to adequate sex education in their communities. In addition, we are looking at more ways to provide birth control through virtually, so that actually you can order it online and don't have to be in a clinic. Because for many rural Americans, it's very difficult to access a family planning provider in your community. So those are the kinds of things.
Not there. I have a pastor in my district who's let me know that he refers women to Planned Parenthood because he knows that there aren't the right community access points. And I know it's been touched on in this committee, but I have personal experience and know many of my constituents in their 20s and 30s and 40s who, without the comprehensive health care services, would have died from cervical cancer. And I know exactly how important, again, in a state that has higher per capita averages in many of these cancer areas for these populations, and particularly for minority populations, that we want to do a much better job investing in comprehensive health, simply do not have it. And the notion that we would continue to discriminate against those populations by not providing adequate federal funding and access makes no sense if what we're trying to do is to maintain my choice about my high-quality confidential provider. Thank you, Ms. Richards, for being here today. I appreciate your testimony.
Thanks for letting me be here. Thank you.
Thank you. We have, members are advised we have 2 votes on the floor. There are approximately 8 minutes left in this first previous question vote. It's the intention of the chair to recognize Mr. Heiss for his 5 minutes of questioning. Then we're going to go to recess. Then we're going to have to come back. We thought we could get through it, but we still have a number of members who have questions. So we'll now recognize Mr. Heiss for 5 minutes. Then we'll go into recess and we'll reconvene after the votes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Richards, just a point of clarification. It's already been established that Planned Parenthood serves a lot of underprivileged people. And I just want to be clear in your testimony, you stated that it is significantly more difficult for individuals on Medicaid to access a provider as opposed to someone with a private insurance, because so many providers now are not accepting Medicaid. Is that correct?
Medicaid patients, it really varies across the country, but certainly
the
there are some states where it's very difficult.
And that's one reason that you would say that Planned Parenthood is needed, because there's a gap there. Is that correct?
Well, I think I think we have tried to demonstrate that we are an important provider of Medicaid services to a lot of folks in this country.
But particularly the underprivileged and
well, that's who, I guess by definition, yes, that's
all right.
who's
So
on Medicaid.
you also said in your testimony that the Government Accountability Office found that about 2/3 of the states are challenged now recruiting OB/GYNs because of the difficulty in ensuring provider participation in Medicaid, and that, according to the CBO, this again is in your testimony, that by next year, Obamacare is expected to reduce the uninsured, and nearly half of those are going to be on Medicaid. So from these testimonies or these statements in your testimony, is Medicaid, in your opinion, a substandard insurance?
In my opinion, is it, no?
Is it an inferior product?
Well, I'm not sure, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that. I think it's important that Medicaid
Well, this is
patients.
according to your testimony, and I just want to know.
No, I don't think I said that, so I just want to make sure I'm clear on what you're asking. I think that it's important that Medicaid patients be able to get the same kind of quality of care as other
But you said
insured
they
people.
can't. They're not able to because so many providers are not. Let's go on to some other things. I was just curious, and those were some questions that I had jotted down. It seems to me that there's a question mark there. You praise it on one end, Medicaid, and then
very
say it's a
important.
problem on the other.
No,
and that's why.
It's not, so I hope I didn't misstate that. I don't think Medicaid is a problem. I think the challenge is because the reimbursement rates are very, very low in many states, there are not enough doctors and healthcare providers that will take new Medicaid patients. That's something everyone struggles with.
Let's go further. I do have some other questions. We've also established today that there has been some excess revenue, as you describe it, other than saying profit, excess revenue, nearly $750 million in the last 10 years, 127 million last year. We can break that down in a number of different ways. And yet at the same time, the dramatic reduction in prenatal care, preventive services, cancer screening, and so forth. And do you have any idea, by the way, how many Planned Parenthood clinics have closed over the last 10 years?
I don't have those exact numbers, and you're referring to a lot of things. I'd have to go back and look at charts where I think we've addressed, and although I know not everyone is here for all of it, why some women's health care services aren't needed on an annual basis anymore. But many of our Planned Parenthood health centers have merged to be more efficient. We started 99 years ago, and I will be candid, there's not always total efficiency.
Okay, well, let me go on. There's been over 100 that have closed just over the last.
Or merged, well, I would say, or
closed
merged.
and merged, whatever. But the bottom line is, you stated just a few moments ago that this 127 million, $750 million over the last 10 years, that you're largely holding it and using it for investment purposes. Why is it on the taxpayer's hook to provide for your investments in expansion when you were declining your services and clinics are closing?
I don't think the federal government isn't investing in our expansion. In fact, the federal government,
you've got 127 million over the last year that's excess.
That was none of that is federal dollars. I'm sorry, that's all raised by private.
All right, so we have 60 million that are federal dollars that comes through the discretionary fund. Why does the taxpayers need to be providing 60 million when you've got 127 million a year? I mean, I'm just going back to the question already asked. I'm trying to find, why is the taxpayer responsible for your expansion?
I'm not holding the taxpayers responsible for our expansion. In fact, the money that is paid for by the federal government through Medicaid, through Title X, through CDC grants, through HIV/AIDS programs, all pay for services directly provided to patients. And there's strict accountability, and we're accountable by HHS, looks at all the Medicaid payments. So we're grateful for the opportunity to serve patients who come into us on those programs. I think we provide very high quality, and that's why patients continue to come to us. And I think patients, regardless of whether they're on Medicaid or not, should have the option to go to the healthcare provider of their choice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. The committee will now stand in recess and reconvene no sooner than 2 p.m., but will be beholden to the conclusion of these votes. Committee stands in recess.